Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Imagery segment. Today, I'm joined with Daniel Leite. He's the VP of Global Marketing for Circle Cardiovascular Imaging. Daniel, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate that you're willing to chat today.
My pleasure, Cal. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, to give the audience, again, a little bit more context about how we came to this conversation today, we looked at well over 240 startups that we think are within the imagery category as a whole. And one of the top companies that we came across was Circular Cardiovascular Imaging. We're really excited about the things that they're doing within, especially cardiovascular imagery. They have a lot of great functionality. They have a huge presence, and there are a lot of interesting markets. So I invited Daniel with me to talk a little bit more about some of the product details, and we can dive into some of the functionality and how the company works. So with that, Daniel, I think we're going to cut to a video so that the audience has a good visual of what the product actually, how it functions and how it works. Great. So Daniel, is there anything that you wanted to add on top of that to just general description of Circle Cardiovascular Imaging?
In terms of a backstory, I think it's not dissimilar to how a lot of the startups started in any industry. We're obviously in medtech, but in our case, I was obviously an incipient need or an unmet market need that existed back 10 years plus ago when the company was funded. And it was specifically on the field of cardiac MR. So back then, a few physicians kind of come together and didn't necessarily like all the offerings that were in the market to read and report for cardiac MR specifically, like I said. So they started to develop a very primary solution, software. Actually, one of the physicians actually went on to study and becoming an engineer, which actually speaks to his passion that he had to resolve that issue. And that was actually picked up pretty quickly, even though it was a very still simple solution at the time. And with all the interest, they again met with some individuals. They started creating some funding, and then they created a company. The company was Circle, and that was around 10 years ago. But I'm happy to elaborate on what happened since.
Awesome. Um, One of the things that was really unique, and I want to get into now some of the product features. You have a lot of functionality, and in short, it's really you are providing a lot of tools that can analyze both MR and CT scans and provide a variety of different insights. And one of the things that kind of stood out to us is, you know, among most of your tools is being able to use image rendering or recognition that really quantify heart measurements. Can you talk a little bit more about, and I mean, we got a lot of features to go through, so, but in the general theme about what it seems like you guys stand behind is being able to take the tools that you have and really quantify a lot of the measurements. Can you talk about the reason why this was important?
Yeah, absolutely, Colin. Well spotted. Obviously, I mean, as an intro, obviously, Circle Cardiovascular Imaging develops solutions for cardiac MR, cardiac CT, like you referenced, and these encompass a full array of specific solutions, namely fully automated quantitative perfusion for the heart, for the flow, myocardial strain, electrophysiology, and also tools for interventional plannings, amongst others. But like you said, the golden thread or the commonality that we have as a vision is that we're trying to transform medical imaging from a qualitative science into a quantitative method. So a lot of our tools were developed with that in mind, certainly, and particularly in the last 5 or 6 years, slightly more, with the advent of AI, which we started to work very early on. A lot of that quantification is based on those tools as well.
Great. Well, and talk about, you know, you have your cardiovascular MRI solution, and that does things like detect wall motion abnormality, quantify flow. Some of the things you mentioned, assess cardiovascular unique structures. How did you build this functionality? I mean, this is a pretty broad question, and we'll go into some of the other specific features, but where does that data set come from to train these algorithms? It's a lot of these things are very unique and very specific, and, you know, how did you build out this tool set?
Yeah, I mean, it was multifaceted, obviously. In terms of the development itself, we have almost 100 people working in R&D every day, every single day, which is quite substantial for a company in our side and operating on a market that we do. So they obviously have a very high technical degree of understanding for that. But moreover, it's the partnerships that we have with key institutions around the world. And obviously a global company operating in almost all continents, from Asia Pacific to United States, in Europe, in Africa, pretty much well over. So we have key partnerships with key hospitals that are kind of doing the state of the art as it goes with cardiovascular imaging. So we're partners to them and help develop solutions with their aid. From a data perspective, to answer your question directly, particularly AI, a lot of kind of the proof is in the data, and that's always the case. And it's very hard for any company to obtain that data, first and foremost, but also to annotate that data and to treat that data on a way that is meaningful for whatever solution that you want to build. So in order to tackle that, we've, again, through partnerships and some government partnerships as well. I can mention, for example, one which was a major here in the UK, actually, where I'm based. We partner with a project, government sponsored as well, which is the UK Biobank, which allows us to get access to a lot of that key data from which we develop a lot of the solutions thereafter. But it's quite a comprehensive project for sure. I'm trying to keep it simple just for the sake, but those are perhaps the 2 or 3 points that I would like to highlight there.
Yeah. Well, it's both for some of the, a lot of the tools, and I'm generalizing because there's a lot of specific solutions that you have, but it's not only being able to quantify a lot of the measurements that you're taking from both the MRI and CT scans, but it also seems like you're trying to identify indications of different types of diseases or any other types of issues. Can you talk about that process of what does that look like to a provider? And how are you diagnosing? Is it in absolutes? Are you saying, are you providing risk levels? I know there's some different solutions have maybe different ways of approaching this, but I mean, how does your platform identifying issues, and what does that look like to a provider?
No, good question, Carl. So the essence of it is in our solution, obviously, as it should be. I think the users always have the final say on how they wish to manage their patients. So we don't provide, this is it and you cannot change it, anything like that. It's not what we do. What we do, in fact, is that we provide quantitative measures. We provide aid to the physicians, to their reading and reporting based on best practices and guidelines that are set worldwide by working with some of the key opinion leaders that we do to establish those guidelines, to work with those guidelines, and then our solutions represent this. Obviously, the physician, like I say, always has the final say in terms of how they wish to do the final diagnosis and to effectively manage their patient.
Okay. Now, I wanted to highlight one of the unique tools that you have, and I believe it's the way that pronounces the ADAS 3D. Is that? And yeah. To kind of simplify it, you're basically taking MRI or MR or CT scans of the heart, and you create 3D models that help really providers quantify or at least visualize fibrosis, wall thickness, the structures of the heart. Can you explain why these 3D models are important, and what is the difference between what providers traditionally would use and how this functionality or this tool improves the workflow of providers?
So what our technology allows is, particularly for the electrophysiologists, to better understand their patients and their patient's heart by kind of translating those black and white typical DICOM images, MRI and or CT, into something they can use. So we also obviously provide the underlying images, but we translate those into 3D models, which you can actually go to the heart in layers, and you can actually see how that particular patient heart is. In case, for example, if they have an infarction, how that is, as that infarct affected the morphology of the heart by ways of fibrosis, for example, that I mentioned.
So it's really just it's taking 2D images and making it much, much easier to understand the issues of the heart and specifically where they are. And having a 3D model helps a lot of these providers visualize that and then make decisions from there.
Yeah. It's
really, really interesting tool. The other thing that you guys talked about, which I thought was unique in comparison to a lot of other cardiovascular imagery startups, is what you have is called the automatic quantitative profusion. And it's simplify it for the audience, those who not may be healthcare providers, you're really just taking multiple MRI scans and you're trying to analyze the exact heart blood flow. Is that the easiest way and simplified way to explain it? Okay. Can you talk about the process? Well, first off, can you talk about why this is important? And can you also talk about how this process is traditionally done, what it looks like at a provider, and then why having this tool has improved the workflow of providers?
Sure. So first and foremost, pertaining the quantitative perfusion, I mean, historically, the way that you kind of analyze the ischemia using cardiac MRI, for example, has traditionally been visual. So we were the first to bring to the market a solution that actually allows to quantify blood flow. And that is, the results are comparable, for example, with PET scans as well, which is something of a gold standard in some countries to analyze the ischemia of the patient. So we provide an MRI-based alternative, which obviously comes without radiation, simply because it's MRI. And that's fully embedded and integrated into the CVI42 tool. So not only can you then do the ischemia assessment by the QP, quantitative perfusion, but you can also perform all the other diagnoses that you need to do that go into association with it. That is obviously assessing the morphology of the heart, or blood flows generically in the vessels by ways of the aorta or others. So it provides that holistic, comprehensive solution on a quantitative fashion that allows you to manage the physicians to manage their patients better.
Okay. And going back to this question and kind of highlighting it again, what in comparison to what providers have traditionally used, not using your 3D models, not using your AI that already helps quantify a lot of the structures of the heart and blood flow of the heart, et cetera. And prior to that, just using traditional 2D images or traditional CT or MR scans to view information and make an assessment and try to move forward. Have they really struggled with traditional processes of using, the traditional method? And is it a really big jump to now using these 3D models, these automatic solutions that automatically quantify a lot of things like the blood flow that we talked about, or the structures of a heart?
Yeah, I mean, so the fundamentals are still there. Obviously, what we bring is an additional method that allows people not only to quantify, but basically to make things easier. You can still do things obviously the traditional way. We just provide a method that is perhaps more reproducible and obviously being quantifiable. It allows you to manage the patients on a certain way instead of, for example, providing a full written report. You can actually provide numbers and values, and those values based on the guidelines help you identify certain pathologies, certain diseases, and so on and so forth.
Okay, that makes sense. And so it really is a significant improvement. It's not just a simple step up from what traditionally exists today. It is really a big move forward in having this functionality. And with that, one of the unique things that within this space, there's a handful of companies that use image recognition tools, image rendering, to be able to provide a variety of different analysis. But you take it one step further. You even have solutions that helps plan for structural heart interventions. You can evaluate, analyze, assess structure of a heart, the different components of it. And then you build out a workflow to help these providers plan out things like surgery or therapy. Can you talk about what this actual workflow looks like? How involved is your platform in providing or suggesting what providers should be doing? And why is this important?
Sure. So from the interventional planning specifically for structural heart disease, which is the area where we're focusing on, we provide many solutions. For example, for TAVR, which is to help planning replacement of the aortic valve, or mitral valve planning as well, septal crossings, amongst many other solutions within that space. So for example, if I focus on TAVR or TAVI, depending if you're in Europe or North America, as an example, it's been around for going on almost a decade now since the first procedure, and we all learn a lot from it. But one of the things that I don't think anybody would argue is the value of imaging into helping plan that procedure better so we can have better outcomes for the patient. So that's where we come in, right? So we take images and we created very specific workflows for each one of the specific devices. And there are many in the market nowadays in terms of aortic valve devices. So we provide an holistic solution that goes from actually understanding what's the access path through the femorals or radial or even transapical or others, to the endpoint, what actually the size of the valve that you should use for that particular patient. That's all based in imaging. So that's where we come in. That's a solution that we deliver, and it's obviously focused within, in this case, mostly CT. That's kind of the gold standard, together with echo, to better understand those patients. And it's, if I look beyond TAVR specifically into, for example, mitral valve, that's obviously a lot of potential there, even to grow to a larger size. It's right now it's over a $15 billion market, the structural heart disease, and I think it's only going to grow faster.
Okay, that makes sense. And then it's not only providing the right measurements or the right I guess the right suggestions and what is the right way to continue with the procedure, and that helps providers find the right medical devices or implants. That also helps them to understand a little bit more about what is appropriate procedure for this structure of this heart. Is your platform, in this case, the standalone workflow, the providers are working directly within your platform the entire time through this process, or is this an add-on to an existing, EHR solution? Or I guess maybe you take this question and step back a little bit further. How do you implement Circle Cardiovascular Imaging into traditional hospitals or work with providers? What does it look like? How much hand-holding does it go into training a lot of your users? And is it an offshoot, or is it the main platform that your users are going to be using their entire workday?
Yeah. So there's two questions in there, I would argue. So I'll tackle those separately. In terms of the integration, let's say we're obviously fully HIS enabled and we're very much plug and play. So regardless of what are the systems they are using by ways of scanners, for example, or other equipment, we're completely vendor neutral. So we integrate with all of that. And in fact, we're direct partners with many of those large equipment manufacturers such as GE and Siemens and others. They're partners of ours. So, that's one piece in terms of the integration and the plug and play and being easy to work with from an IT perspective, but also for new users to kind of get adapted to the new methods and get this integrated into their workflow. But that's perhaps the IT solution. I think the major piece for us that makes it a full encompass solution and why we're market leader in many countries has to do with the education that we also provide to the physicians. So we have developed specific efforts within the medical education sector. Not only we provide user certification cases to our users by ways of direct trainings and offsite trainings and things of that nature, but we also at the higher level provide medical education. It's something that we call the Symphony Academy. So users can register for that and they can be educated in multiple aspects of cardiovascular imaging, not just necessarily associated with CDI-42 and what we do, but cardiovascular imaging in general. And beyond that, we also partner with a lot of the societies that operate in this field to, again, provide that education to physicians and help to grow the market as well, particularly within cardiac MR and cardiac CT. That's something that we're very thoroughly involved with some of these societies to deliver.
Okay. No, it's quite unique because I think you also have And then you just mentioned, and even an education platform on top of that you highlight in your website that a lot of people can learn quite a bit of information from. One of the other tools that I want to quickly highlight, you also have a specialized tool for the assessment of coronary artery disease using CT images. And this can be calcium scoring, this can be plaque assessment. We kind of touched on this earlier. How are you providing the right scores, or how are you providing these scores? How are you assessing these patients? How involved are you making a diagnosis? And what does that look like to a provider? And I know you talked about how you're here to assist providers, not take over work, not take over their decision-making power. So on a tool like this, what does that look like to a provider?
Yeah. So if I focus on the coronary artery disease market, let's say, which is the solution that you're referring to, it covers multiple aspects. You mentioned calcium scoring. So for that, we use the traditional Agatston scoring, which has been very extensively validated by many decades. So we obviously have a very streamlined and automated AI-based system that allows users to automatically quantify that. And additionally, you also mentioned the plaque. So the plaque feature or module allows us to actually evaluate not only the quantitative value, but also the composition of each one of those plaques, which obviously has implication in terms of the management of the patient, either by being, calcified or non-calcified plaque and things of that nature. And furthermore, and perhaps what it's used extensively routinely has to do with obviously actually quantifying the vessels or the artery itself. So again, we provide very optimized tools that allow the physician to visually evaluate, but also quantify some of the stenosis in case that exists, or the size of the vessel and things of that nature. And that obviously is a great gatekeeper for patients in the early coronary artery disease, for intermediary risk patients, for example. Instead of doing a catheterization of their arteries, they can do this exam, and it has a very high negative predictive value. So just by that exam, you can actually avoid and something that is a little bit more an intervention, right? So it's a lot more invasive.
Gotcha. And I apologize, because you have so much functionality that for a lot of specific use cases, it's kind of hard to go into each detail in every single one of them. But in general, it's really your platform is allowing providers to really visualize. You're presenting data, and absolute data that can quantify a lot of things exactly. And from that data, providers themselves can make the decision about what they should do. It's not, in some cases, and for most specific use cases of your solution and your platform, it's not that you're saying this patient has this type of disease or this indication. You're more or less on the side of, here's the data, let the provider make the decision. Is that how most providers prefer it, or would they rather have you tell them and make the decisions on their behalf?
That's arguable. This is our vision, and I think it certainly aligns with what we feel our customers want by way of primary market research. We can certainly try to go in another direction, but this is, I think, aligned with what the market needs, and that's why we're doing it in this fashion.
Gotcha. Well, and I wanted to jump, because one of the things that was, I think some of the newest version of your software, as you announced how you've launched all of these AI assist tools for the number of different solutions that you already have today, and kind of that segue into that. Can you talk more about what those AI assist tools are doing for a lot of those types of features? What's the primary shift? And it might kind of blend into the last question that we had, which is, how far are we making a decision on behalf of providers versus how are you just presenting, the data that they need to know?
Yeah. So I think I'll answer that on a more broad scale.
Sure.
Because for me, AI is perhaps one of the largest revolutions of the century, and it's been around for many decades, but particularly over the last 5 years or less, it's just been used not just in medtech, but particularly in medtech. If you look, for example, at RSNA, kind of the main focus of that is all about AI, and it's for a reason. And for me, the reason is that AI, if, all by just being a tool necessarily, but if applied correctly, can really revolutionize not only how quickly we can, develop new tools if we have the proper data and we have proper ground truth and the proper annotation into that data. So you can easily, if you have the expertise, you can easily create a very competitive solution in the market in whatever field it is by using this very revolutionary tool. And that's the key of AI for me, and that's why it's so revolutionary, not only on medtech, but in finance and all the other areas that exist. But for me, it's important, and to kind of tackle what you said, it's important to understand that it's still just a tool, so it needs to be used correctly, right? So as any tool, if we don't apply these techniques correctly, then we won't have the accurate results, and then we'll be making decisions based on inaccurate data. So that's perhaps the caveat of the use of AI.
Gotcha. And do you have a specific use case about how your AI assist tool in one of your solutions? I know that you have a big tool set, but I'm just curious, what does that AI assist tool look like to a provider? And this could be for automating measurements, this could be performing a diagnosis, this could be creating procedure plans. But could you give us an example?
Yeah, so gladly. So for me, perhaps the most impactful would be the way that we use AI to actually quantify volumes and actually the morphology of the heart and things like ejection fraction and so on and so forth. So just to give you a frame of reference, even in nowadays, but particularly if you look a few years back, it was not uncommon if you're doing a typical cardiac MR exam, including everything, that you took over an hour to do everything. And I'm looking at the images, reading, and then reporting, and you have to actually manually draw and measure and quantify the region of interest in very specific areas, measure all the heart. So you can imagine it's quite cumbersome. So we developed a solution that does all that work to very high degrees of confidence, comparable with users with 20 plus more of expertise in the area, just with a click. So basically you do a click and the system does it all for you. And then again, the user just needs to go in and validate if that results make sense, if there's any mistake, for sure. But you don't necessarily need to do that manually and lose, between brackets, an hour. You can just do that in a few minutes or seconds even. And then you can use the rest of the time either to do more exams or actually to be more thorough with each one of the patients, do more sequences or acquisitions that allow you to further diagnose and things of that nature. So for me, that's perhaps a quintessential example of how AI is revolutionary and how it's been revolutionary in CVI 42.
Okay, that's really cool. I want to touch base on the actual physical process of how providers interact with your tool and how it's implemented. Earlier, you talked about how you partner with a lot of different companies, you have a lot of integration partners. But what does that actually physically look like? How is your software implemented or used within a clinic? And how are you actually plugging in, like how do you input these MR, CT scans into your platform? And what is are you providing a laptop? Are there computers there? Is it a web portal that providers are using to look at your solution?
Yeah, that's the easy piece. So like I mentioned before, that fully is enabled, right? So the solution that we provide from a technical perspective is a client server solution. So typically you have a server where that server is connecting with all your modalities, either that is MR scanners of any brand and model, or CT scanners, or both. It all feeds into that server. And then that server is connected with basically the client machines, the workstations, where the physicians can work on a concurrential fashion. So I can actually be in this laptop, I can be on my reporting room, and then I go to visit with a patient or do a consultation. I can continue doing my examination there. Wherever I have an installation, a client installation, I can do that. All that analysis and reporting, if applicable, get fed in back to the server, and it integrates with PAC systems or VNAs. So it's all registered there. So if, again, that patient comes again for a follow-up, you can actually re-access all that data, all the analysis that you did, not just the report, but actually the physical measurements and the quantifications. So we can have a record and an history of that data for that particular patient. So I think the value of it's invaluable, providing that service to not just to the physicians and our users, but to the community and the patients.
Okay, that's relatively simple then. I'm curious on just kind of as a company. It seems like healthcare software companies have really long sales cycles. It's hard to sell into providers. It's difficult to work with, EHR platforms. I mean, how do you guys manage this? I mean, does that change how you operate? I'm just curious how you've overcome a lot of these obstacles.
Carl, that's absolutely true. I'm painfully aware of that. And the way that we kind of tackle that, it's twofold. And the first, kind of at the risk of repeating myself, has to do with being completely ease-enabled and the kind of the plug and play aspect of our solution that is not over encumbered into the IT departments and having all of that configuration. You can do that in a matter of hours and get ready to start. So that's the plug and play concept. But the other aspect, as far as kind of the sales cycles go, it has to, our solution is really diversifying our sales channels. And that's not only by ways of our partners that I mentioned a few, like Siemens and GE and by IBM and other partners, which with whom we're partnering into delivering that solution embedded within their systems as well, as it's the case with the ones that I referenced. But we also diversified it from a geographical perspective. So like I said, we're a true international company. We have 60 nationalities working with us by ways of our human resources, and we're operating in over 50 countries with multiple regulatory approvals, all that sort of stuff. And we have physical presence of not only sales representatives, but application specialists and technical support in many countries around the globe. So by diversifying that geographically as well, we were able to diversify those sales channels. So we're able to, not being relying on, if a pandemic happens and it critically hits, the US randomly, we're not, we don't have our eggs in one basket. So that's kind of how we tackle that issue.
And kind of following up on some of the points that you mentioned, and this is kind of more of a general question, but it's hard, I think, as a healthcare IT company or a software solution to grow internationally. And especially different providers in different markets, have completely different systems, might operate differently. How have you guys managed to grow at such a big international scale? Has it been just a long, slow, painful process? Is it, do you see quick growth? Do you identify markets that you already know that you want to tackle? You already have partners that are there before you go there? Like, how does that process work?
I wish I have one answer for all that to fit all of those, but I think it's on a case-by-case scenario. Certainly, we understand what's the market potential. We understand typically which markets are going faster, and what our customers want. So that's all we need to know. That's the foundation. And then based on that, that's how we do our investments. So for example, if you look at cardiac MR, in most countries, it's growing at around the 5% compound annual growth rate. But for example, if I look at the BRIC economies, then that's actually close to 10%. So that's obviously a guidance for us to as a business. And that's, for example, the reason why we have physical people located in China, where it's growing a lot, or in Brazil, or in other markets that I can reference. And we have a very long history with key sites there on our over 10 years of operation now. And a lot of the key opinion leaders, which have started to do cardiac MR many years ago, we've been their partner for a very long time. So we've created very, very strong relationships with them. So that's also very beneficial into helping new people. And that's where the education comes in, right? Educating people on the value of these techniques, and at the same time, the value of our solutions, and how can we help them reach where they want to be and manage their patients more effectively.
Isn't that really what resonates with your customers, is the deliverables that your software can offer? Is that kind of what you guys end up pitching?
Yeah, yes and no. I think it's also the relationship aspect, and obviously, as being a market leader, like I mentioned, in many countries, it has been there for a reason. So it's not just about the solution on itself. Obviously, it's an holistic solution, and it's very flexible, so it can fit needs from small clinics just doing a few exams to multi-hospital enterprise solutions. So that's really beneficial regardless of where you're working or what is your system. But I think the most important piece for us is kind of the human factor, and actually being there with them with all the stages of their education, and assisting with that, and being part of that journey with our customers. That's, for me, is the secret sauce.
And with that, I'm curious, what is the business model for your platform? I know you talked about the scale that you can work with small clinics up to very, very large hospital groups. What is that business model? And then take that one step further. When I guess, how would you say, what is the true market size for cardiovascular imagery, and what is the potential here, and why is it, why are you guys excited about that?
Yeah, so the first piece I already mentioned, obviously the scalability and the flexibility before, and that's certainly a very big part of the business model, and the education engagement with the key opinion leaders and our customers in general, but also, and perhaps first on that list, would be the innovation piece. And for us, it's so intrinsic into our culture, because if we look, almost every year we have something that it's revolutionary to the market, and how people actually use cardiac MR and cardiac GT and all the techniques we discussed here. All of those technologies that we discussed throughout this interview have been quite recent, right? So if, for example, I haven't discussed strain, but that's perhaps 5-year-old technology for us. We were, again, one of the first to the market to develop. We have 4D flow as well. We haven't discussed it, but again, a very recent technology that we were, again, one of the first to the market. Quantitative profusion that we discussed, but that's less than 2 years old technologies, actually, just over a year. We were the first, and we're still the first commercial solution in the market that allows for the fully quantitative solution, fully quantitative evaluation of the perfusion of the myocardium. There's nothing out there commercially to that nature. So that innovation piece, being the first to market, that's why we have such a very high component of research and development within our company, so that we can be very agile on the way that we develop our solutions, and also the quickness into how we go to the market, and how we go to the market with a solution that it's been studied, it's been market validated before and it's actually answering the customer's needs. So that's sounds simple, but it's certainly complicated because it has a lot of gears moving, and it's certainly being one of the, if not the secret of our success so far.
And just a quick, and it's more of a, for most providers that you work with, it's more of a, you license your software as a subscription model, or do you charge per scan or per image, or how does that actually work?
Yeah, we have diverse sales pricing and sales models.
Okay.
Not only through our partners, to whom some customers can buy directly through them using their solutions, which has obviously been embedded with CVI42. We also sell direct by obvious reasons, and that can be on a permanent basis. You can actually purchase the license and have a physical license, but you can also have a subscription type of purchase for the solution. So like the technology on itself being flexible to the user's needs and adaptable, so are our pricing schemes as well in our business models.
Awesome. Okay. I'm curious how, and this is a question that I obligated to, I feel like, to ask, is how has the recent pandemic at all changed how you operate? It's changed the focus of the company. How has it affected you? I'm curious.
I'll be lying if I said that it hasn't affected us. I mean, it affected everyone, even on a personal note, obviously, in the way that we manage our lives, and the inability to not travel as often and not being face to face with our customers, and vice versa, not being as often face to face with us. That obviously has a big impact. But with great challenges comes great opportunities, and it allows us to refocus a lot of our efforts into the online education business by ways of, for example, the Symphony Academy that I referenced, and again, understanding our customer needs, that even though they cannot travel, they still have a need for, or not attend conferences or courses, they still have a need for that education. So not only by ourselves with the Symphony Academy and our proprietary education systems, but also in partnership with those societies which are suffering from the same issues. How can they support their members? So for me, that's been perhaps the opportunity that we tackled. And again, just being agile, being always innovative, means understanding the market, and the market can rapidly change in one direction or another. COVID is an example. So being very quick to react to that and adapting our solution is essential for any company nowadays, and particularly in the medtech sector. That's certainly true.
Well, thank you. Daniel, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been a pleasure. I don't know if is there any other closing remarks that you want to make before we end this interview?
No, certainly, I'll certainly take the chance here. I think perhaps as a message and something that we obviously struggle with by kind of arguably operating on a very technical field, is obviously growing our team and getting access to dedicated individuals that are passionate about medical imaging and cardiovascular imaging to come to join us. So we're always looking for best individuals that kind of fit this culture. So if anybody's interested to know more, to go to our website. We're always looking for engineers, application specialists, sales engineers, research and development, regulatory affairs, you name it. Always looking for passionate individuals to come and join us.
Awesome. Well, then, Daniel, thank you so much. I really appreciate, again, taking the time to do this. We were super excited about Circle Cardiovascular Imaging. You have a ridiculous tool set that does some incredible things. And the reason why we picked you as the top company within the imagery category as a whole was because of all the different product features that you have, because the markets that you're in, because your team and the vision that you guys have. And I'm happy that we got to go in detail of some of those aspects today. But thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Carl. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks for your time.